Hello YouTubers, I'm Robert Breaker, and I just want to take a little bit of time to make a video about the good old days of America. I'm about 40 years old, and I grew up in the good old United States of America. Grew up in the 70s and raised in the 70s and 80s, and I remember the good times, the good old times of what made America so great. So I just had a couple things I thought I'd mention, maybe remind you, some of the people that lived during the time that I lived, how quickly our country has changed, and it's not like it was when I was a kid. As a missionary to Honduras, I went to Honduras for about 7 years, and I left in 2001. And when I came back, this was a completely different country. It had changed so much in just that short time that I had been gone that I almost didn't recognize my country. I still to this day can't believe you go to the airport and they're allowed to touch your private parts, but they do. It's like the old story you heard about the frog. You throw a frog in a pot of boiling water, the frog's going to jump out. And you take him, put him back in, he's going to jump out. You can't boil a frog in boiling water if you throw him in it. What you have to do is you have to put the frog in the pot while it's lukewarm, and then turn up the fire, and then he'll die. Well, that's what it's like in the country that I was born and raised. It seems like there's been such a drastic change that when you look at the old days and look at today, you see it. But it's gone by so gradually that it's like the frog. It got boiled. So let's just talk a little bit about what was life like when I was a kid. Some of the things I remember, just to try to show the difference between the good old days and today. So I wanted to talk about the good old days. A lot of people may remember or may not remember what it was like in the good old days. So I was born in a little town called Milton in Florida and raised there, and I remember that there were many times that we didn't even lock our doors. We didn't have to. There was no crime, no need to. I knew a lot of people, you'd go to their house, they'd leave their front door open all the time. I don't see that today. As a matter of fact, the Bible says in the last days, perilous times shall come. And I believe we're in those times. You should never leave your door unlocked. Always lock your door. But I remember quite frequently we'd go down to the local grocery store called the Piggly Wiggly, and we used to always call it the Hoggly Woggly, and we'd always leave our car doors unlocked. I remember that distinctly. I remember many times we'd go to the Piggly Wiggly and my mom would just leave the keys in the car. And we'd go in and do our shopping, and we'd come out, and I remember we'd have 2 gigantic carts full, and it was like about $100 or less for 2 gigantic carts full of groceries. I mean, up to the top and almost falling out. But what different times things were cheaper and things were safer. Imagine going to the store today and leaving your car keys in your car, leaving the door unlocked. It's probably not going to be there when you get back. But yet that's the time I was raised in and the time I grew up in. Things were a lot different. One time I remember as a child I went to a bank, and this had to have been in the 80s. And I remember I was probably 9 or 10 years old, and I was so young I was probably more interested in playing than anything else. But I remember going with Mom and Dad to the bank, and I remember looking up behind the teller, and there was the interest rates for savings accounts. And I remember it like it was yesterday, as distinctly as I can. I remember seeing 18% interest rate for a savings account. Can you imagine? Today, it's 0.000 something percent. But they actually gave you 18% interest rates. That's why I remember Reagan was so great. Ronald Reagan was so awesome. But I remember as a kid seeing things. I also remember 17%, but I remember the highest I ever saw at the bank was 18% savings account, a percentage for you taking your money to that bank. What different times we live in today. 18% savings account. Wow. Some other things I remember. Well, actually lots of things. I remember as a kid going to school and going to a secular school. Unfortunately, I wish I'd been homeschooled, but I went to a local school here, and I remember in the middle school that I was in, I remember sitting there in history class, and I remember the recanting or the retelling of the story of the Civil War. And I remember our teacher telling us, I'm like, plain as day, I can see her face, and I remember where I sat in the classroom and listening to her. And she told me this. She says, the Civil War was about states' rights. Don't you ever forget that. Don't let anyone else ever tell you any different. And she went through and she showed us the history of the Civil War and how it was all about states' rights. And she actually told us the South was right. Wow, they don't teach that today in school. So I grew up in a different time. And I also remember that our teacher I cannot remember the lady's name, but I can just see her face and the chalkboard and everything, just like I was there in that classroom. And I remember our teacher telling us, you live in the United States of America. You live in the greatest country the world has ever known. And our teacher said, you know why this country is the greatest country the world's ever seen? She said, because of the court system. Because in the United States of America, you are innocent until proven guilty. Plain as day, I can remember her saying that. America is the greatest country on earth because you're innocent until proven guilty. Well, what's it like today? About the exact opposite, isn't it? Nowadays, they can take you, put you in jail. They can keep you indefinitely. They call it indefinite detention. They can put you in jail and leave you there. And what do you have to do? You got to get a lawyer, you got to pay all this money, and you've got to prove you're innocent. Why? Because you're guilty from the get-go. So it's changed from the greatest country in the world because you're innocent until proven guilty. Now you're guilty until you can prove yourself innocent. And even if you do prove yourself innocent, so what? They can still put it on your records and put you on lists that you can't do such and such, or you can't have such and such. So times have changed. They've really changed a lot. Well, I had the privilege of growing up next to a bay. And we lived on the bay, and we'd go fishing every day. I remember as a kid, I'd get my bike, and I'd go from my bike, I'd go several miles away, just riding all over on my bike, by myself. 8, 9, 10-year-old kid. Nobody around. We lived in the middle of nowhere. My parents didn't worry about someone kidnapping me. I read a story not too long ago in the paper where they tried to take away a person's kids because the parents let the kids go right across the street and play in a park. And they said, oh, you've abandoned your children. No, you didn't. They let them go play. Well, I got to free roam. I guess I was what you call a free roaming child or a free roaming individual. I think they call it a free range child. And I was free range. Wasn't a chicken, but I was free range, and I got to go all over the place. And I remember as a kid, I'd ride to the end of the point and go all the way down to the end of the point, and there was a gas station down there. And I remember it like it was yesterday. Like I said, that's 30-some years ago in the 80s. And I remember all I had was 2 quarters. I could rub them together. I was riding my bicycle, rubbing my quarters together, and I'd go down there all by myself to that gas station. And I remember I could buy a Coke and a candy bar. Man, what good times. I just went to Walmart the other day. Candy bars like 74 cents on sale. On sale! You could get 4 candy bars for $1 several years ago. So times have changed, but I remember I used to be able to ride my bike and go anywhere I wanted to, anytime I want, be gone all day, come home. No big deal. Nobody thought anything of it. My parents trusted me. They knew I was safe. My, how times have changed. I remember we used to go fishing. My dad had a long gill net. It was a 1,500-foot gill net. And I think it was about 5 feet high. And we used to take that straight out from the beach, all the way out 1,500 feet, curve it around like this, and my dad would walk it back in to the beach, so it made what they call a purse, a round circle. And any fish that were inside that net, we would take this in and we'd pull that net in. So eventually that circle would come all the way in, and we'd catch fish. I remember we'd catch 20, 30, 40 speckled trout, mullet, flounder, all different kind of fish. Man, what a blessing that was. And I remember doing that as a kid. We'd invite people over for church and sometimes do that 2 or 3 times a day and have enough fish for everybody and have a fish fry. Well, wonderful times I remember as a child. Well, guess what? It's illegal to fish in the state of Florida with a gill net. You're allowed a little 12-foot net where people can get on both sides with certain holes about that big, where about all you get is little minnows and shrimp. But you're not allowed to take out a 1,500-foot gill net. Why is that? Well, I remember why. I remember my dad talking about it and why they outlawed those nets. You see, the bay we lived on was full of fish. But they allowed these Vietnamese to come in from another country, from Vietnam. They come to America, and their livelihood was fishing. But you know what? They didn't have to get a fishing license. They allowed them to go fishing without a license, even though they were illegal aliens. And over several years, they fished out our entire bay. And I remember the county outlawed gill nets because there was just no more fish. And why wasn't there any fish? It was the illegal aliens' fault. They took it all. So we lost our privilege, and they passed a law that says we're not allowed to use gill nets anymore. Good old days. I remember the good old days, but they're just not that many good old days anymore. Now I just got to go out with a little old cast net that's about a 10-foot, and maybe I catch some mullet, maybe I don't. I don't get the good fish anymore, like redfish and those other kinds. So I remember the good old days, and I remember how things have changed. I remember we lived out in the middle of nowhere, and we used to sit up on the deck, and my dad had a .22 rifle. And we put a cup way out there, probably about 100 feet out, and my dad taught me how to shoot, pow, 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 off the deck, and I'd make that little cup dance in the air. Those were the good old days. Can't do that anymore. The neighbors would call. Of course, we didn't have neighbors at the time. Neighbors would probably call the police and say, they're shooting out in the front yard, you know. So, yeah, those were good old days. I count myself privileged to have grown up in a country where there was so much freedom. Matter of fact, we have a couple pictures of me as a little 5-year-old. And I used to go out as a 5-year-old and play in the water all by myself in the bay for several hours at a time. And I remember taking a bench from a picnic table and turning it over and pushing it out off the beach and pretending like that was my boat and pushing it around. We still got some videos of that too, I believe. Well, today, they wouldn't allow that. My mom always said, well, I always watched you, but I remember as a kid, no one was around. Well, she said, well, I was up on the deck watching you. The deck was a good 200 feet away from the bay. I was a fish when I was a kid. I think I learned to swim when I was 2. But anyway, so those were the good old days. I remember times like that. I remember we never worried about anything. We never had to. All our needs were taken care of. My dad had a job and everything was great. Economy was good. 18% interest. Come on. Wow. But today, wow, things are so different. Where are the good old days? I remember my dad would get his bicycle and my mom would get her bicycle. And on the back of my mom's bicycle there was this seat, and I would sit on that seat, and I remember being 2, 3, 4 years old, and I'd ride on the back of that bicycle, and my mom would follow Dad, and we'd go way, way away, probably 5, 6, 7 miles away. It was an all-day trip. We'd just take bike riding. And my dad would have his .22 rifle on his back in case he saw something that was going to try to attack us. You can't do that today. I remember seeing a video online on YouTube not too long ago about a man with his son walking down the street in Texas, and he had his little AR-15, and the cops pulled him over and put him in jail. What did he do wrong? Didn't do anything different that my daddy used to do. Only my daddy was on a bicycle and he wasn't. People are thin-skinned. People are frightened. They said, well, someone called and they were afraid of what you might do. What you might do? Still can't forget my teacher, you're innocent till proven guilty. Now you're guilty because they presumed you might do something. I just remember the good old days. I wish we had those good old days back. There were so many different times that I remember, and good times and great things that happened. Maybe you have some remembrances of the good old days. Maybe not. So, yeah, maybe we've lived in a blessed community that's not like the big cities, but slowly but surely I'm seeing a change in our country. And all the things and all the good times I remember as a kid, they're just not that good anymore. Things are changing. Police state, things are being set up. Things are changing. And I'm almost afraid to leave the house nowadays. You could be driving down the road and they could pull you over and take your money. Or they could pull you over and put you in jail or tase you. There's many stories on YouTube and on the internet where people are just driving down the road and they're pulled over by cops and the windows smashed out and then pulled out and beaten up. What a difference. What a difference. I remember the good old days. I remember being taught as a child to respect the police. And that's what I do. I respect the police and respect them. But boy, how different things are. I remember when police would look at you and presume you innocent until proven guilty. But now you're guilty until proven innocent. So there's a lot of things that I remember as a kid and how different, how great things were. One of the greatest times I remember was when the family would just pack up on the weekends and go on down to the river and go to the canoe rental place, rent a canoe, and we'd all take a canoe trip and just go on down and have a good time. And we'd take our Bibles with us, and it was a church canoe trip. And afterwards you'd set up and put a fire on the bank there on the beach and sit around and someone would preach the Bible to you. Well, now, in most parks, they don't want you to set fires. It's amazing. I remember as a teenager, we'd go out to the beach, and on the white, beautiful beaches of Pensacola, actually toward Perdido, you could take a bunch of lumber and just put it out there and set a fire. Matter of fact, I remember you could take a tire and put a tire out and set a fire with a tire as well. Now it's legal to start a fire on the beach. Why is that? I mean, you got everything you need to put a fire out, sand and water, and it's right there. But oh no, you can't start a fire on the beach, it's illegal. The good old days don't seem that good anymore. So what do? There's a lot of things that I remember as a kid and how things today are so different. And they're just not the same as they used to be. I was born and raised down in the South, where they call it Southern hospitality. And I remember we'd visit people. I remember something that I haven't seen in years. I remember that when you go to church, everybody at church knew each other, and they knew if somebody was struggling, or maybe they were in between jobs and they were going through some things, that the big deal for the family was to go and buy them a couple bags of groceries. And it was a big deal. Even the kids got involved because they knew the family's kids, and they said, I think they like this, I think they like this. And then you take it to the family's house, put it on the doorstep, ring the bell, and run away. And they'd come out and, oh, who was that? Oh, gross. Oh, that's exactly what we needed. Can't tell you how many times I remember as a kid doing things like that to help people, and doing it anonymously so you wouldn't get any praise for it. But I haven't seen that in a long, long time. Charity. There just doesn't seem to be any more charity anymore. The Bible says the love of many wax cold. It used to be that we'd have telephone and all you had was a landline. And I remember people used to call each other all the time and talk. And nowadays, people don't want to talk on a phone, even though that's what a phone's for. And they have these phones that they carry everywhere, not just in their house. No, we don't talk on the phone. What are you, crazy? No, we text. Well, I remember the good old days. Texting. What was texting? I've never understood that. Why would you rather write to somebody when it's so easy to just talk on the phone? I've known people, and they've got one of those little cell phones, and they text all the time, and then someone actually calls them on the phone, and they say, I don't want to talk to that person. Click, and there's actually a button on your phone now that says ignore, and you can ignore a person. I remember the good old days when you didn't ignore somebody. It was a blessing to get a phone call at home. Someone's calling. Who could it be? You know, I remember the kids and the parents would say, let me get the phone. No, let me get it. Someone's calling us. It was exciting to hear from other people. And now you carry a phone where you go, and oh, not him again. Click, ignore. Oh, not that one. Oh, ignore. And rather than call and talk, text, 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 text. The good old days were so much better when you could talk to people. So just lots of things that I remember as a kid that were just so great. And yet, my, how times have changed. Maybe you remember some good old days, some good times, some good things you went to. Let me know. Let me know. I remember one of the best things was whenever you get to go have a sleepover at somebody's house. And you get to go over there, and I remember several times going over and sleeping and spending the night at somebody's house, and behind their house they had woods, and we'd go track through the woods with our guns and have our little BB guns and stuff and shoot squirrels and all that kind of stuff. And now, are you even allowed to do that anymore? I mean, all our freedoms are slowly eroding away. As a missionary, when I was in Honduras, I remember feeling like I had more freedoms in a foreign country than I do here. Over in Honduras, you can ride in the back of a pickup truck in the open bed and just sit there and ride down the highway. You try that here in America, they pull you over immediately, maybe even put you in jail. It's illegal to ride in the back of a pickup truck. Of course, when I grew up, everybody did that here in the United States. So I remember a lot of good things as a child, a lot of things that we did, and freedoms that we had that today you probably can't do. But it was a lot of fun, and I miss those days, and I wish we had them back. You have any good old days? Any old recollections of things that you remember when you were a kid? I'd love to hear them. Why don't you leave in the comments some of the good old days you remember and how your country has changed and you can no longer do those things that used to be so fun. Thank you for watching.